Okie dokie. There we go. Now we don't have to listen to me talk on many speakers. Okay, so let's just roll over to Canvas real fast and explore what we're going to be talking about this week. As I mentioned earlier, today starts our journey really understanding all of the rigging components inside of Modo. Well, not all of the rigging components, a select few. The conversation about rigging is so complex and so advanced that it is impossible, and I really do mean impossible, to talk about all of it in one time. Okay? Gotta remember my password here. Okay, cool. So GCOM 410. Let me cruise over into student view real fast. So what I see, or what you see, is the same thing on your own local computer. Okay. Oh, before I get any further, did everyone get the announcement from me about the FBX stuff? Okay. Clear? Did it work? Did it fix people's bugs? Great. If it didn't fix it, don't worry about it. You're not going to be marked down or anything like that. If my solution to the problem didn't fix your local kind of issue, maybe we can troubleshoot that during lab today. Sometimes those errant normal maps just appear out of nowhere. So keep that in mind. We can fix stuff. Let's jump over into week 2. Excuse me. All right, so today what we're really going to focus all of our energy and effort on are the rigging tools inside of Modo, okay? It is a deep conversation, this rigging stuff, okay? This is the most technical conversation we're going to have probably in all of my classes, okay? Because that is a really good illustration of how advanced this part of our interface is, okay? However, we're going to be doing little small baby steps, okay? I'm not going to be asking you guys to rig a character next week. We're going to kind of graduate into character rigging, okay? We're going to start off pretty simply by exploring some simple relationships that we can create inside of Modo today, and how we can start adding some modifiers to these relationships to create and generate some really great movements, okay? One thing to point out, I have a lot of learning resources, small specific videos on how the rigging stuff works. Please, please, please use this as an encyclopedia. The live streams are a great resource to kind of generally see what we talked about in class. But if you're like, I don't know how to make control surfaces, here's a small little snippet video just about how to create locators and apply them as control surfaces in our rigs, okay? Great video encyclopedia of the content that we're going to be exploring in the rigging section. You're going to need to lean on this over the next, probably 4 weeks or so, because we're going to be in this conversation of rigging for about 4 weeks, okay? We have 2 goals this week. First, you're going to be doing 2 animations and 2 renders this week. The first one's going to be a simple chain animation. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And then also our big homework, which is going to challenge you guys on a lot of different levels, is going to be a catapult, okay? A catapult rig, and of course I want to ask you guys to spend some time remembering what it's like to render, okay? Inside the catapult rig and render assignment sheet, I've given you just a very, very small illustration of what your animation could look like, okay? So it's not going to be anything super high-tech, but the rig is going to allow us to create some pretty compelling movements easily for our animators. And then you're going to have to figure out how to rig or add materials, go through all the whole material setup, and then render this as well, okay? I'm looking for you to be extraordinarily creative on this assignment, so please, 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 and I say this at a couple points, and I even put it in big and bold in the assignment sheet, don't copy what I've done. That's not the idea here. I've given you a basic building block, and then you need to build upon that, okay? More on that later as we get closer to the conclusion of class today. All right. With that said, are there any questions? Yeah.
Pull up the play menu. Isn't it this?
Oh, you're in Finder. Click on Modo.
I'm in.
Okay. Control space bar.
Control space bar.
What app or layout are you in?
Somebody changed the key bindings.
Yeah, someone may have changed the key bindings on you. I don't know how they did that, but that may be it. Yeah, there's an empty machine over there in the back. We can restore all the Modo preferences to get you back up and running here. Okay. I'm waiting for Modo to launch, by the way. All right. Oh, I forgot one thing. let's start by going into the animated chain assignment sheet, because the resource file that I want you guys to use is embedded in this assignment sheet. Most often going forward, if I need you to use something in an assignment, I'm going to put it in the assignment sheet itself, okay? So it kind of forces you guys to read the assignment sheet to find the embedded link. However, if we cruise down, let's start by looking at the Chainlink project file. It's a good place to begin our conversation about rigging, okay? All right. All right, now let me get rid of all this mumbo jumbo. Okay, so here's my Chainlink project file. If I open it on up in the Modo, this is what we're going to get. Something that looks not too dissimilar from that. Okay. Now, yes, ma'am. Pat, you get a question? No. Oh, okay. Now, in all the other classes that we've had here at SEC, we've spent a tremendous amount of time, of course, in the modeling tab. If you've taken GCOM 401, you hung out in the animation tab. And then naturally, in all of our classes, we spend a tremendous amount of time and energy in the render tab. The one environment that we really haven't exposed any of you guys to yet is the setup tab, which is where we can find all of our rigging tools. Today, we're going to start with this very simple chain link, but we're going to make a very what will be a very simple rig with some complex moving parts to allow us to create an articulated movement of an entire chain. So one link is going to turn into an entire chain. And yes, you are in every sense beginning to build your lab assignment. So if you're following along, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, you too can start the process of building the rig for your lab assignment with me right now. Oops, sorry, bad timing. Okay, so let's jump over into the rigging environment, which is also known as the setup tab. Okay. Now, the setup tab is a pretty detailed environment. This is going to be our home away from home for about half the class, okay? So this is going to be an environment that we're going to need to become really comfortable with. Now, there's a couple small things. If you haven't noticed, Modo has a new little control bar that's inside of our OpenGL viewports, okay? Specifically, this thing. Oops, I'm all zoomed in, so it's going crazy. But this little control tab bar, it's actually pretty neat. This is going to save the most recent tools inside of that area. You can also go in and add your favorite tools inside of that little zone if you'd like. It kind of keeps you in the viewport versus forcing you to go over into the toolbar and away from your area interest. However, if you don't like it, just please note that the keyboard shortcut to remove it is going to be Control Tab. I'm going to say bye-bye. Okay, not needed. So we can get a little bit more clearer look at what the setup interface is all about. Much like our modeling interface, the screen left part of our application is full of all of our tools. And just take a look at all the vertical tool tabs in here, because there's a bunch of stuff inside of the tool area in the setup layout. Of course, naturally, we're going to find a lot of our rigging tools. But if you continue going down in here, we're finding deformers, weight mapping. This is where we're going to find all of our dynamics and particle system stuff. So the setup tab plays a big role in a lot of other areas of inside the animation pipeline. Okay, so it's not just rigging stuff inside the setup tab. It's a lot of other things as well. Okay. We'll be talking about dynamics and particles here in probably about 6-7 weeks. So we'll be coming back in here, and we're going to be spending some time in and out of these vertical tabs over the next few weeks. Okay? So lots of tools, lots of tools. Just like the modeling layout, of course, naturally we're going to get an item list way over here on screen right and its associated properties tab. So that should be a very comfortable work environment for all of us in here. But most importantly is this center area, okay? This center area is very, very different than the viewports that we've seen before. It's broken up into two sections. Now, the top viewport is like any other viewport, standard OpenGL viewport. Nothing magical. You've been working with that, since day one here in Modo. However, that bottom section is what's new, awesome, and incredibly, at times, complex. Does anyone remember or have been exposed to what this bottom section is called? This is called the Schematic Workspace, okay? One of the things that we're going to be doing in here, and we're actually going to get to this a little bit today, is making some nodal connections between a number of groups and items inside of our scene. This is where the rigging part of this class gets complex, okay? The schematic interface allows us to do a tremendous amount, okay? We're blessed with a very awesome modern tool set inside the rigging portion in Modo, okay? It's pretty great. If you think this is hard, I should open up Maya and show you all of their rigging tools, okay? Because it's even harder in other applications, okay? The rigging tools inside of Modo are very actively developed. One of the core developers of the rigging tool set and the rigging workflow is a guy named Rich Hurry. And Rich Hurry is one of the lead articulators and character riggers down at Pixar. And he said a number of times that in every sense what you're seeing here is very, very similar to the rigging tools that you see in the proprietary tool set down at Pixar. Okay? So it's a very robust, modern rigging tool set that comes with a lot of bells and whistles, and it's pretty rad. I like working with the rigging tools inside of Modo. To get things started though, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to work with the schematic, until probably the last half of class today. And generally speaking, I want as much space inside that viewport up top as I possibly can. So let's maximize the top screen, and we'll say goodbye to the schematic. As a small, simple reminder, this little button here just maximizes the viewport that you've clicked in, okay? It doesn't delete the other viewports, so I can maximize it. Now, if we want our schematic back, just go return to that yellow arrow, click on it again, and that schematic window is returned into the layout itself, okay? Is there a keyboard shortcut for that? There probably is, I just don't know it. This is important, especially if you go over into the design lab, you open up the setup tab, and the schematic window's gone, okay? It's been maximized, okay? All right, let me maximize mine. And in addition, I'm going to change some of the behaviors of my viewport just to kind of clean up our interface. Now, the setup layout is going to bring to the surface the number of background items and channels that you don't normally see or need to see when you're modeling, animating, or rendering, okay? I'm going to change it just ever so slightly because I don't necessarily need to see my lights and my cameras in here or the visibility of these two items. So if I hit the O key on my keyboard, bring up my viewport properties, the visibility section will let me turn off my lights and my cameras, okay? All right. In addition, I'm also going to change my viewport drawing method from shaded back to default. I like default. It just works for me. The OpenGL viewport, the OpenGL drawing method is pretty fantastic. And now we're ready to start working. Rigging is all about making relationships. In addition, think of it like this. We're building a little machine here, okay? This is absolutely a 100% like right brain activity. There's nothing artistically creative about rigging. There is creativity found in every single rig on the face of the planet, right? Because a physicist is just as creative as a fine artist, okay? Just they're creative in different ways, okay? How we build our machines allow other people inside of our production pipeline to take it and do some pretty creative stuff with it as well. So one of the things we kind of have to have, let me rephrase this, the goal of all of our rigs are kind of varied. We have to make something that works, okay? And that works for the context of the movement that we're making it for. Point being, our rigs aren't going to do everything, nor should we try to make our rigs perform and do every single thing on the face of the planet. This requires some forethought and an understanding of the animation that you are making this rig for, okay? There are no mega rigs, there are no super rigs, okay, that do everything. That's actually kind of a bad idea, okay? It makes a very unoptimized and inefficient environment. I'm not going to go in and do my full character rigging process for a simple chain rig, okay? How I rig a car is going to be different than how I rig this, right? And how I rig an airplane is going to be different than how I rig a car, okay? What's important, given the idea that our landscape is kind of varied, is understanding what we're making the rig to do, and then we make it to do just that, Okay. We're also making it for people who are, well, for other people, right? As riggers, or as technical directors, or articulators, as they're often referred to out there in the production environment, they're not the guys and gals that are going to be animating this, right? In some studios, the modelers make the UVs, they make the textures, and then in some places, the modelers also do the rigging, okay? But that's only in certain places. In a lot of big studios, the modelers are over there, the texture artists are over there, the riggers are in a different building because they just think oddly, okay? And the animators, they're in their own wing too because they think a little bit differently. Our workforce is separated out into a lot of small, little, minute jobs, okay? So we have to remember that we're building our rigs for our animators. We don't want our animators breaking our stuff, right? I don't want my animators touching my mesh. I don't want them going into my rig and monkeying with things because their tool set is not one to be messing with my stuff, okay? I was talking, I'm being silly, by the way. Okay, I was talking with a mechanic who services Jaguars. That's what he does. That's all he does. And we were talking, I don't know how this subject was brought up, but he's like, if you ever look at the engine compartment of a Jaguar, it is designed for people who know what they're doing to go in and repair it, okay? There's specialized tools and workflows, and the automotive manufacturers and designers designed the engine compartment for professionals to service, not for someone like me who has no idea about cars, okay? We have to remember that we're designing our rigs for an animator who's going to have a different tool set and is going to think very differently than the way we think, okay? So a conversation with our animators as to what they expect the rig to do is really important, okay? Now we're going to be building a little chain today, and the expectation for the chain is that we can independently kind of grab each chain link in the larger chain itself and make it wave back and forth. That's it. That's all we need this rig to do, okay? That's the animation we're creating, so the rig is going to match the animation that we're creating, okay? So we always have to keep in mind the goal of the rig first. Okay, before we do one thing, before we make one connection or one relationship, we have to have a solid understanding of what this thing is going to be used to do, and then we do just that one thing. Okay. Questions on that so far? Make sense? Yeah, okay. All right. So we're going to be building a small little machine, but the first thing that we really have to go in and begin to talk about are some component pieces that will allow us to create a complex machine. Now, if you've been working in the modeling, just in GCOM 402, we didn't even talk about center points. If you take in GCOM 401, we talk about center points a little bit. But here in GCOM 410, we really need to dig in to some component pieces that are associated with every single item, okay? Now, if you look carefully over my item list here, we have a single mesh item inside the scene. It is lovingly referred to as chain. Okay, so if I select my little chain guy, and please note that I'm in the item selection set, okay? What the computer is going to bring to the surface here is, of course, the geometry, but most importantly, look at the center of the chain link. What do you see? Yeah, okay. Does anyone know what it's called? This is called the center point, okay? The center point. It's the little white disc on the inside of the chain link. It is sitting at the origin of the scene, okay? It's right there at the middle of the XYZ axis, but this is called the center point, okay? Now the center point is an important component piece of an item. The rigging tools are item-based, so we're never going to go in and make a relationship between two polygons on different mesh items. That's not how this works. Our system, our entire animation and rigging system is an item-based system. So we're going to be rigging items to items, okay? The center point is the common denominator between all items. Every camera has them, every light, mesh item, particle generator, replicator, everything has a center point. It's one of the defining characteristics of an item, okay? If we were to hit the Y key on our keyboard and bring open the item transform tool, look very carefully at where these tool handles show up. Yeah, they show up at the center point, okay? Even if we were to translate this object away from the origin, the tool handles are always, 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 always going to show up at the center point of our item. Let's just do it real fast. If I just move it back on the Z, over here on the X, now we're offset from the origin of the scene. And thank you, Modo developers, for giving us this awesome colored indicator of the origin. I love that, by the way. That's very handy, okay? The tool handles are always, always going to show up at the item center point, okay? You can drop it, select it again, hit the Y key, and we're up and running. One of the muscle memories that you're going to have to change here is getting out of this polygonal selection mode, right? As 3D modelers, cool, that's the world that we need to live in. But as riggers and animators, we work at the item level, okay? Okay, so the item center point is a pretty important little nugget, if you will, for us. All of our animation happens, well, all of our mesh, all of our pieces of geometry are going to be centered around the center point. But it's not actually where our objects rotate around. There's another component piece in here that's at the moment unseen or hidden, okay? Now, if you don't see your item center point, by the way, this is a viewport property that we can toggle. Some folks like having the center points on all the time in every single viewport. Other times, not so much. So if you walk over into the design lab and you open up the setup layout and you're like, where's my center points? Make sure, and they have shuffled some things around, and here it is. It's under item visibility. Show centers is currently on selected. Now you could do all, and it will show every single item center point for every item inside the scene, okay? Or what I usually like to have it on as is just show center points on the selected item, okay? Now the other thing that we need to look at is the pivot point, okay? Because the pivot point is really what's responsible for determining where inside of our three-dimensional scene our item is going to rotate, scale, or rotate, move, and scale around and from. Okay. So let's do this, and this is where it gets a little confusing. I'm going to go back into my viewport properties, and now I'm going to turn Show Pivots from None to Selected. And it's really difficult to see. And if there's one thing, I wish it was we'd be viewing one or the other. We're actually at the moment seeing both the pivot point and the center point at the exact same place at the exact same time. So let's deactivate the visibility of our center point so we can view our pivot point. Okay. Now, what visually on the icon at the center of your chain link here is the difference between the center point and the pivot point? You got it. It's got a little checker pattern on it, okay? The checker pattern one is the pivot point. And this component of an item is actually where our item rotates around, okay? Check it out. We can move these if we wanted to. They're not static, kind of unimportant members of our rigging system. They're actually active participants. So I could go in and change the location of my pivot point, okay? To do that, in the Setup tab, they've exposed a selection set for both pivots and centers, okay? So just because you can see your pivot point or your center point doesn't necessarily mean you have the capacity to select it. If I change my selection state over to pivots, whose keyboard shortcut is 6, by the way, on the top row of your keyboard, okay? Now I can go in and manually, physically click on my pivot point, okay? It becomes a component that we now can edit inside of our three-dimensional space. Now for the most, yeah, go ahead.
Does the pivot have to be visible in order to click it?
I believe so, but let's test that theory. If I go back into item selection set, oops, and put my show pivots to none and show centers to selected, okay. If we were to change over, yeah, see what it does? I changed my selection set from items to pivot, and it's still being drawn underneath my center point at the moment, okay? So if you know you want to change the location of your pivot, make sure you turn off the visibility of your centers. The center point is really kind of like a representation of the center of the geometry, right? It doesn't actually define where this geometry is going to be rotated, scaled, and moved inside of our three-dimensional space. Okay, so with that said, check it out. I've gone in and I've just selected my center point. I know it's selected because the background color of this of my pivot point has gone from white to orange, rock and roll. And if I was to fire off the move tool with this selection in tow, you can see that I can move it around. Whoop, which is pretty cool. If I was to return, I'm going to drop the tool real fast and return to items selections, my item selection state. Hitting the Y key now, where does my tool handle show up? Not at the center point, right? My tool handles show up at the pivot point, okay? So the pivot point is truly where our objects are rotating, scaling, and moving from, okay? Now this is cool, and this is pretty neat, because now we can create some pretty customized animations without having to create complex rigs to drive that movement. Yeah? Okay. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, because we're telling the computer to not display the center point, right? Yep. So I would leave it on selected, personally. All right. However, if we continue to look at the interior of my little chain link here, there is a relationship that's being drawn and visualized on the screen for us. And what is the visualization of that relationship? A little dotted line. Where's that dotted line going to? Center. The center point. Okay? So the center point and the pivot point are connected to each other. Okay? If I was to move my center point now, let's just do it real fast. Return my selection state to centers, grab my center point, and then move it. You can see what happens. Okay? So the center point is always going to be the driver, the parent, if you will, of the pivot point's core location. We still can move each one of them independently, but changing the location of the center point is going to have an influence, a direct influence on where the pivot point's location is. Here's a good rule of thumb when trying to manage center points. Center points represent the center of a piece of geometry. Okay? The pivot point is where that piece of geometry rotates around or from. Okay?
So in this case, the pivot would be like the anchor point?
If you want to think of it like the anchor point, yeah, absolutely. Yep. The pivot point is where your tool handles are going to show up in item mode. So I go to item mode, hit the Y key, check it out. That's cool. Now what's neat about the center point, what's neat about the pivot point is that I can animate its location, which is pretty neat. Again, allowing us to make very complex animations using simple component pieces. The center point is not animatable. The pivot point is. Okay? Imagine that we have a cube, okay? A simple box going down a stair, right? And our job is to animate, not even just going down a stair, maybe we want the cube to flip over as it rotates and kind of goes across the screen, right? We can do that easily by animating the location of our pivot point, okay? It's pretty cool.
So that
Yeah.
the pivot point, I'm basically trying to resize this, or I'm selecting the item, resizing, but the resizing is going from the pivot point as well.
That's right. Everything, the scale, rotation, and the transform, which is position, happens at the pivot point.
The center point is only for like reorienting the geometry and like the origin.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I really want to kind of encourage the idea that the center point is a representation of the center of the mesh. Okay? All right. So I'm just going to hit the undo key here for a second and get everything back to where we had it. Okay. Questions so far? Let's test this idea. Let's test this theory real fast and just have some fun. And remember our animation process here inside of Modo, because as a rigger, you are preparing, a whole series of things for animation. Now, I know some of you guys have taken GCOM 401, some of you haven't taken GCOM 401, so let's get this kind of foundation set on day one. How to make things move inside of Modo, okay? This is something that we're going to be doing every single week, okay? And I think in this little visualization, we'll kind of remember or learn really the role of these pivot points in the larger context of the animation engine. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create the world's best animation. In that, I'm going to move my chain link from the right side of the screen to my left side of my screen. So with that said, how do I do this? How do I animate the chain going from, or this link going from screen right to screen left? So we got to create a keyframe first. I mentioned this before, but let's reinforce the idea. What mode do you need to be in order to animate something? Well, no, what mode, not what layout. Because if you look very carefully down here, we have a timeline. We actually have all of the animation controls minus a couple here inside of the setup layout. But what selection mode do we need to be in order to animate something? Item mode, right? Because we have an item-based animation system. We're never, ever, ever, ever animating vertices, edges, or polygons. We're always animating items. Okay, so I'm going to hit the number 5 key on my keyboard. And I am going to start animating this thing. Okay. Now I'm a big believer of making some selections and some keyframes just right off the bat. Okay. Now I have my my link already selected here, and if we cruise over into our Properties tab, you can see that there are a couple channels that have that background highlighted color. This is what we're after. All right. Because now we can start placing keyframes on just those highlighted channels, which is pretty cool. Does anyone remember how we can simply key in, let's do this, let's do the X position. How do I capture a value and key it inside of Modo? There's a couple ways we can do this. What's the easy way? Just click on the dot, you got it. Click the little radio button next to the channel that you want to key, and we'll create a keyframe for it. Boop, okay? When the circle goes red, we've captured that little chunk of data and we've preserved it in a keyframe. If we cruise down to our timeline here real fast, we'll get a nice little visual reinforcer that that keyframe has been applied with a little square on the actual timeline ruler itself. Okay? Awesome. Mission accomplished. So we've selected our item. We've keyed a channel. What's the next thing that we got to do? Anyone remember? Yeah. To animate it. You got to advance your playhead forward to somewhere later in your timeline. So let's do this. I'm just going to go to frame 60 here. I've clicked on the ruler marker. My playhead's been advanced to frame 60. I know that because it's white. And now, what's the next step? What was it? I just couldn't hear you, Jason. Just move the item, yeah. In the animation engine, I'm in the transform tool, by the way. And the animation engine is going to auto key it for us. Okay? We know animation has happened inside of our screen by looking down at our timeline. If you see a gigantic green bar in the ruler, aha, mission accomplished. The computer is now translating between those two little keyframes. Okay? Let's play our animation real fast and see what we get. Cool. Perfect. Oh, world's best animation, right? Hooray. Let's make it a little bit more complex, because animating the position really doesn't showcase the importance of the pivot point inside of our animation engine. Let's rotate this thing. And I think I'm going to return once again to frame 0. And I'm going to rotate my object, let's see, I'm going to rotate it along the Z axis. Okay? So here's rotation Z. Go ahead and lock that down or preserve that rotation value in a keyframe on frame 0. And then once again on frame 60, let's see, I'll just have it do, 2 complete revolutions, 720 degrees. by returning to frame 1 and hitting the play button, you can see what we're after. Now, I want you to pay really close attention to where your little chain link is rotating from. Yes, sir?
Is there a shortcut for play?
There probably is. Yeah, there probably. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I want you to look very, very closely at where your little chain link, if you're following along, is rotating from. If you've done it correct, or if you've offset your pivot point as I have, it's going to rotate around that object. Where is it not rotating around? The center point. Okay? Animation is all about the pivot point. Okay? It's all about the pivot point. Let's make it a little bit more complex, just to kind of prove that the pivot point is truly the driver here. If I go over, I'm going to scale this down to a much smaller percentage. I'm going to grab all of these. If you hit the S key, S is the keyboard shortcut, S as in September. Our new month, we're starting a new month today. Woo! I always love the beginning of a new month, right? Because it's like, fresh start, okay? The S key is the keyboard shortcut for adding a keyframe on the selected channels, okay? Now, I went ahead and selected all 3 of these channels before I hit the S key. It's real easy. If you put your cursor either on, you see how I'm going to put my cursor over here on the left. The background color for each row changes. I can grab the first one. The first one's selected because it's orange. And if I hold down the Shift key and grab the bottom one, it does a gang select as it's called. And then I can just hit the S key. So I've keyed in those scale percentages, and once again, I'll go to frame 60, and let's see, I'll put them at not 0, let's put it at like 10%. So now it's going to get teeny tiny. Let's play the animation. And where is it scaling to? The pivot point. It's not scaling to the center point, it's scaling to the pivot point. Okay? Cool, huh? Any questions on this? Yes, sir.
So for the rotating part, do you just rotate at the end, or for the keyframe?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Would you have to, would you have to like put a keyframe at the end part?
Yes, you have to have a keyframe. In order for animation to happen, you have to have 2 keyframes, right? A start and a stop. Other questions on the role of the pivot point? So it's muy importante, okay? It's the foundation of our animation engine, that whole pivot point thing. Okay. Bear with me for 2 seconds. I forgot my water bottle in my office, and my throat's already getting dry. Okay. All right. So now that we have command and we've kind of refreshed our memories, if you will, of the animation engine here inside of Modo, let's kick it up a notch and start looking at how we can make some very simple relationships. Rigging is all about relationships. It really is. It's all about making meaningful connections between 2 items, and then in the future we'll also go in and start making connections between item channels as well. At the core of the rigging engine inside of Modo, or in all applications, we have the most simple form of a relationship. And actually, before I go any further, just to make things a little bit easier to understand, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to revert my project file back to its original state, because we've messed around with some stuff, and I want just kind of a raw, untouched version of my chain link. Let's do it. File revert. This is going to restore this project file back to its original state. Are you sure you want to do it? Yeah, I'm sure. Boom. Okay, so now my chain link's back in the center. Its center point and pivot point are at their defaults. And with that said, I apologize, I may have skipped this earlier. What do you think the default location for every center point and pivot point is? The origin. Okay? It doesn't matter where you create your mesh inside of your scene. The center point and the pivot point are always, always, always going to be created at the origin. Yeah?
For the real, do they go back to the last save, or does that everything back to the beginning?
It goes to the last save. Yeah, that's a good question. So if you revert your project file, it's going to revert it back to the last time you saved that project file.
What was the option? I'm sorry.
It's under the File pull-down menu. And revert, I think it's about halfway down. Yeah, right under Export As, revert. Yep. Yeah.
Does Modo save automatically, or
It does save automatically. There is an autosave. It's something that they're trying to make better. Maybe that's the way, because autosave tends to take over your machine for a second. If you want to turn your autosave off, and I think this is a good thing to do, I would absolutely encourage you to go check it out. It's under your global Modo preferences, under autosave, and I'm just going to turn mine off. Every 15 minutes, it's going to do an autosave.
Is it possible to make like another save, like for autosave?
So what autosave doesn't do is overwrite the file that you're in. It creates a temporary file that lives in a cache folder on your machine. Yeah. And the function of autosave is just to kind of help you mitigate crashes. If you crash at some point, the autosave system will kind of come to life and say, hey, do you want me to open the most recent autosave of your project file? And if you hit yes, it will go into that temporary cache file, find the autosave, and open it. All right. So let's start making some relationships, okay? Some relationships. For our first assignment here, for our first little part here, what we're going to do is that we're going to, in order for us to make a relationship, we need to have two chain links, right? Does anyone remember how we could easily duplicate this chain link? We just need a copy. Copy paste works, but what are we copying and pasting? The item, right? So triple check, make sure you're in item mode, as I am. Aha, rock and roll. And here's a good keyboard shortcut. Instead of copy paste, we're going to do duplicate. Okay? Now, there's a couple ways that we can go about duplicating an item and the entire contents of our item. If we were to right click on the item over in the item list, at the bottom here is duplicate. Okay? That's cool. That's fine. This is legit, great way of working. Bloop. Now we have two. If you look at your item list, you can see both of those two here. I'm going to nuke that guy just for a second. Here's a great keyboard shortcut, one that I would recommend that you commit to memory because you're going to be using it all the time. It's Control-D. D is in duplicate. D is in dog. Okay? And that's going to duplicate an item. There we go. Basically does the same thing, but it's a good keyboard shortcut to commit to memory. All right. Now that we have two chain links here, let's start playing around with how we can make these very simple relationships. Now, I think what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to take chain link number 2 here and simply just move it across. I'm not going to start forming the chain yet, because I want to lay some foundation level ideas before we go too much further into this process. So I have two chain links. At the moment, they're independent items. Without any sort of relationship between these items, they behave like any other item would. We can animate them independently, move them around, scale, rotate, whatever. They're not going to influence each other at all. Yes, sir?
what if we have like two chains in the same
Yeah, so just make sure you select the correct link in your item list. The item transform tool will only move just that one piece. All right. And I think what Alan is kind of bumping into here is something that you're going to learn to love and hate with working with items and in the rigging tool set. is selecting things in the item list, okay? Because oftentimes these items are going to be on top of each other. You'll see here in a minute when we create locators, they're going to be very small and very difficult to select inside the viewport. Very easy to select it inside the item list. Some people would argue that that's the function of the item list, is for us to very quickly select these variant items. Okay, so at the moment, each one of these things is independent from the rest, okay? I can go in here, move this guy around, same with this one, bloop, we're on our way. They're not influencing each other yet. Rigging is all about making relationships between different items. So let's make our first relationship. It's the most basic relationship that we have, and it's called a parent-child relationship, okay? The parent-child relationship allows the parent to influence the transform channels of the child. Now, transform channels, what in the hell is that? Good question, right? Good question. Rigging ultimately gets down to channels of data that are changing over a period of time or on certain influences. I don't have anything selected. Specifically, these things, okay? These are transform channels. Position, rotation, and scale channels, okay? Rigging is all about having one item influence another item's transform channel, okay? Or channels, excuse me. And we can even say influence all of the transform channels, or I want the movement of A to only affect the rotation of B, okay? So we can get really kind of specific as to how these transform channels are going to be working with each other, okay? These transform channels now become a really important component for us. In the modeling world, we don't really pay attention to these transform channels all that much, right? Here and there we do, and they do play a role in the modeling workflow. They play a major role in the rigging and animation workflow. So we're going to be making relationships between the different transform channels inside of the parent-child relationship, okay? Now, whenever I discuss parent-child relationships, I always like this kind of, analogy in my mind. It's like if you ever go to the mall, okay, you always see, moms and dads out there with their kids, and they go into like a toy store or whatever, and the mom is like dragging the kid with her, right? Wherever mom goes, the kid goes with it, right? Wherever the parent goes, so goes the child. However, the child is free to move about in a certain area without having to influence mom and dad, right? The parent. So the child is always going to be a little bit more independent. Wherever the parent goes, however, the child is absolutely going to go with it. Let's make our first parent-child relationship. It's wicked easy here inside of Modo, okay? Has anyone done this before? How do I do it, Ellen?
Drag and drop.
Yeah, so there are a couple ways that we can create a parent-child relationship, okay? And there are some differences in here that are important to understand that we'll talk about in a second. But the easiest way to make a parent-child relationship inside of Modo is to take the child and drag it. I'm left-clicking and dragging it on top of another item. See how when I move things around, I can put it in the middle of another item. The gold bar is in the middle of that item. And if I was to let go, we've now created our first relationship. We have created a hierarchy. You can see that chain 01 is now connected, or actually, I flipped it up. Chain 2 is now connected to chain 1. Okay? Let's see what that looks like inside of the viewport and what effect that has on the rig that we just created. Because you guys created your first rig, by the way. Congratulations. Okay? This is the most simple rig that we're going to be working with. Now, please note, I've selected the first chain in my hierarchy, okay? Before I move this, what do you expect would happen? They're going to move together, and you're absolutely right, because the transform channels of the parent, of this guy over here, are going to be fed and influence the transform channels of the child. So I move one, and the other moves, okay? And FYI, this is all of our transform channels, okay? If I scale, direct, direct influence. Okay? So where one moves, where the parent moves, so does the child. Okay? Let's animate this real fast and kind of see this example coming out in front of us. So I'm going to animate just the simple rotation of my first chain link. Let's just do rotation Y. Over the course of 120 frames, we'll have it rotate twice. Okay? If I was returned to frame 1 and hit play, you can see what's happening. I rotate one, and the other one rotates automatically as well. Okay? Yeah? Yeah, there you go. Just put it right on top. Mouse up. Yeah, just let go. There. Oh, you're okay. So Demetrius just ran into a problem. Okay. Let's check out that problem real fast together as a crew. Now, I want to hit undo. There we go. Okay. So, and I'm going to hit undo to a point where let's just do this. If I can parent things by dragging them into a hierarchy with another item, how do I unparent them? Drag them out. Yeah, it really is that easy. So I'm going to drag chain 2 and drag it below my camera, and now these two are no longer connected to each other. Selecting the first one proves the point. Okay. Now the problem that Demetrius ran into was he went ahead and animated his first chain link before he made the relationship, before he created the parent-child. Okay? Let's just do it real fast. Okay? So now I want to hit play. That chain link starts to do its thing. Okay? Let's stop it and return my playhead to frame 0. Now if I try to parent chain 2 now, okay, well, in this case, it's going to work, I think, because I only have 2 keyframes. But I've seen this before in other capacities where the system will go, you can't create a parent-child relationship on something that's already animated. Okay? Now, Demetrius, on yours, are both of your links animated or just one? Which one did you animate? Okay, hit play for me. Okay. Actually, they're both animated. And that may be the root of his problem. Both of these things are animated, which actually kind of makes sense in the large scheme of things. Because remember, with parent-child relationships, the transform channels of the parent, so all of this information in here, all 9 of those transform channels are being fed into the child, right? If the child doesn't have any keyframes on it, it's still going to work. However, let's do this. Let's go back in time a couple steps here before the relationship was created. Okay, so I'm on my second keyframe now, or my second chain link. And let's do this. Let's have him rotate around the opposite direction. Okay. All right, so that's my animation. Cool. If we try to make the relationship now by dragging and dropping it, there it is. This parenting and unparenting this place is not supported for animated items, okay? The parent is trying to feed all of its animation and transform data to the child. Well, the child already has keyed and preserved transform information on it, so the system is saying, no dice, this isn't going to work. We have a conflict here, okay? The child already has transform data applied to it. Let's go back in time a couple steps, get rid of some keyframes, and shoot, let's just do that. Turn that keyframe off. Now, this relationship, or the child still can be animated. We just have to animate it after the relationship is made, okay? You got it. Yeah, turn off, delete all the keyframes on your second chain link. Okay? And then, like I'm about to do, just triple check things here. Yep. Then, if you make the relationship as I have, okay, now we're working. My computer just wigged out, sorry. There we go. Awesome. So the chain link on the left is the one that has the keyframes on it. Since I made the parent-child relationship after, okay, I still can go in and animate the second one, okay? So all of this link's information is being sent here, and then this new keyframe information is going to continue. So it's a modifier to the transform kind of network here. So we can still animate these things independently. We just have to do it after the relationship has been created. There we go. Cool, huh? In the large scheme of things, I really wouldn't recommend that you animate things until the entire or all the connections have been made. Then you won't run into those conflicts like we did earlier. Okay? What's cool about this is that we can create complex animations without too much setup, right? Trying to animate this without a parent-child relationship is not impossible. It would just require 4 or 5 other items to be added into the scene, a couple other, animated characteristics. It'd be more complex. This simple relationship allows us to basically animate 2 channels on 2 different items, and we're done. Because I'm only animating the Y transform channel, Y rotation on chain link 1 and 2. Cool, huh? Parent-child relationships. It's pretty neat. All right. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit undo a couple stages here. Actually, I'll just revert my project file. That'll be faster. So now I just have that single chain link again. And let me duplicate it one more time. So now we're back down to 2. Now it's important to know and understand the distinction between what we're doing when we're dragging and dropping things over in the item list versus what we see in other parts of the interface. Because this is where it gets to be complex if you don't know the difference between the two. Because Modo's not going to pull any punches, okay? It's going to assume that you kind of know what you're doing, okay? So let me help you out. This is something that was a landmine for me when I first started working with the rigging tools inside of Modo. So I have 2 chains, right, or 2 chain links. If I take number 2, drag it on top of chain link number 1, we create a simple relationship as we just saw, okay? Just like that. This we know. What we're actually doing in that moment is parenting, but we're using a very special type of parenting called parenting in place, okay? Because if you think about it, remember back what I said at the beginning of this whole conversation. When we parent something, the transform channels of item A is being sent over to transform items, or the transform channels of item B. So why aren't they in the same place, right? Because what is being sent from A is overriding what is being sent, or what is being received by B. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I want to hit undo just for a second. Okay, so if we look at the transform channels between the two chain links down here, chain link number 1, its position is 0, 0, 0. Rotation is also at 0, 0, 0. And scale is at 100%. Chain link number 2, check it out. Its position is not 0. It's 2.34 meters. If you take what I said and really run with it, this shouldn't make sense. Because the transform channels on the first one, its position is at 0. So if it's sending 0 to the second link, what should the location of the second link be? 0. Okay? What we are actually doing in here when we're dragging and dropping is called parenting in place. And we're kind of adding the transform channels from A to B. We're not overwriting it, okay? A parent in place is going to leave the child in its current location. It's going to preserve that value, but still make the relationship, okay? This is a parent in place. The child stays in its location. However, I want to hit undo just to go back in time. we can run, oops, there we go. We can perform a true parent where the transform channels of this one will overwrite the transform channels of that one. Okay? Let's just do it real fast. If you're in your setup tools, or your setup layout, excuse me, the setup tools will give us access to a lot of really fun things, one of which is a command that says parent. Okay? So the way this works is that I have to select the child first, and then hold down the shift key and grab the parent. In my mind, and you'll see this selection system many, many, many times going forward, in my mind I'm saying this is going to that. Okay? So the first thing that we click on is always going to be the child of the second thing we click on. This is going to be parented to that. If we were to hit parent, it still does it. Yeah, rock and roll, good. Okay, yes sir.
What if we were to have like multiple chains and we highlight all of them? Would it all of them pair up to the?
Well, all of them would parent to the last selected one, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately it wouldn't make just a wonderful little hierarchy, you know. Yeah, I wish. That would be cool. That would be cool, right? So this still works the way it's designed to work. Good, that's good, okay? I'm going to hit undo for a second. I bring this to your attention because, you know, we work in the wild, wild west around here, okay? We go over in the design lab. We have, like, you know, illustrators and engineers messing with their stuff, poking buttons and hitting things. And at times, the interface in the computer for you may just not work the way you saw it working here in class, okay? And this is something that a lot of folks miss because we don't really have to turn it on very often. But people that don't know what they're doing tend to hit it, or sometimes hit on accident, okay? Which happens. Accidents happen. It's this compensation button, okay? This compensation allows us to do a true parent-child relationship. Now watch what happens now when I do the exact same thing. This is going to get parented to that. Bloop. Oh, it's going to make a liar out of me. No, that should have done it. Hold on a sec. Yeah, no, okay. Because when compensation is on, it's still parenting in place. All right, don't worry about it then. Don't worry about it. They did, well, here's the way to manually show you what I'm trying to show. And maybe I myself am aware of something that they changed in the system to prevent you from doing this. Because most times you don't want it to move its location. From time to time you do. Okay? Check it out. If you just simply left click and drag, you'll do a parent in place. Okay? Where this thing is going to stay in its current location. If you were to hold down the option key and you do the exact same thing, whoop, what happens to chain link number 2? Yeah, it moves back to the location of chain link number 1. Now we're overriding the transform channels on chain link number 2 from the transform channels on chain link number 1. Okay? Huh? It's still a parent in place, okay? Or excuse me, it's still a parent, but we're overriding transform channels. There we go. All right. You won't really have to do that very often, but it is there, okay? All right. Questions so far? Cool. Parent-child relationships, they're pretty fantastic. I tell you what, we've been going for about an hour and a half. Now's a really great time to take a break. Okay? Let's take a break. So hold on just a second. Be back at 2:40. All right, all right. Let's get back together real fast. I want to continue our conversation today, and then I want to give you guys some time in lab to start building some of these rigs and creating your animations, because I know you got a lot of work in front of you. Okay, so once again, I've reverted back to the original version of this project file. Okay, so just a single chain link. At the beginning of class today, I mentioned that we're always going to be creating our animations, or excuse me, our rigs for animators. Okay. In that process, we need to create some control surfaces, so buttons and knobs that will allow our animators to kind of go in and manipulate our rig without having them touch the things that could potentially break the rig, okay? Because I don't want my animators touching my mesh, because they're not modelers, right? They don't know what they're doing. They're going to break something. I don't want the animators to be really touching the internal working components of my rig, because they're not riggers and they could break something, right? But we do want to give them the functionality that they need to go in and to create, something that's really compelling and infuse that an illusion of life into all things that in our scenes. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to simply duplicate this little chain link a couple times. What's the keyboard shortcut to do that? Control D. Let's do it. Actually, before we go any further, this is a great little trick. Where do we want all of our chain links? Okay, project yourself into the animation of this, okay? Where do we want our chain links to pivot and rotate around each other? Think about it. Project yourself into the animation. You have an entire chain of these links. Where are they going to be rotating around? Yeah, down here, right? Because when gravity takes over, this is approximately what it's going to look like. Okay? Cool, right? Pretty neat. So where does the pivot point for each one of these links need to be? Up towards the top of the link, because that top is going to be resting on the item that's below it, right? Make sense? So here's kind of a great little trick. I'm actually going to delete my second chain link, and because I'm going to have to do this for 10 links, right? Change the pivot point for 10. I don't want to do that for 10. I wanted to do it one time. So I've gone in, I've changed my selection set into pivots. I've selected my pivot point on the first chain link. It's just chilling down here at the origin, and then with the move tool, the W key, I'm simply going to move that pivot point roughly up where I want it to go. Right about in there. That's good enough for me. Okay. Now, when I duplicate this chain link, the item, that it will also duplicate that change in pivot. Okay. So instead of having to do the exact same thing 10 times, I do it once, and the computer will do the rest for me. So now when I duplicate that item and move it down, see how the pivot point is also duplicated? Pretty cool. Yes, sir. So that's your center point, right? Yeah, that's your center point. Here's what I would do. Hit the O key and bring open the visibility of your pivot point, right? And I would set to none. But that's selected, and I would do show centers to none. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, well, you select the item. Yeah, because remember, because we go into item mode, then select it. Click. There it is. Yep. Okay. So now I can duplicate a few of these. Control D, move it down. I'm going to do this just right quick. Okay, I'm just going to do 3. I'm not going to go through and do all 10 because it would be like watching paint dry. Okay, and that's your job. Okay, so now we're starting to create a more articulated rig here. We haven't made any relationships yet. We just duplicated the items and positioned them where we want to be inside of our 3D space. So now is probably a good time to start making some relationships. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
Okay.
So as to not have to do that one at at a time, 10 times, can we just do like 3 and then copy and paste those, and then like duplicate those 3?
Give it a try. See if it works. Yeah. But the answer to your question is yes. All right. So you are more than welcome to go up over here and start making that parent-child relationship by dragging and dropping in here. I want to show you one other thing that's particularly cool, and this is one of those Modo workflow modifiers that I wish all apps had, and it's called drop actions. Okay, this allows us to use the power of the OpenGL viewport to make relationships and connections between our different items. Okay, I want to change my drop action to parent in place. That way, the child object, the child item in our relationship stays in its current location in 3D space, but it's made a child of another object, right? We're going to parent it to something else. We're going to leave it in its current location. So drop action is to parent in place. Now watch, this is kind of cool. I'm going to start at the bottom. I'm going to grab this guy. This is cool. I'm going to drag. I'm going to drop it on that one. When the rollover highlight shows up, that means you're going to make a meaningful connection. I'm going to zoom out so you guys can see it. Drag and drop. Look what happened over here. It made the connection for us. Ta-da! Let's do it again. Drag and drop. It made the connection for us. Okay? The drop actions are a really great way to use the OpenGL viewport to quickly make these relationships between different items. We're going to be using these drop actions a lot. Because sometimes the item list is a really big benefit for us. But other times, I just want to be able to, I'm looking at the model. It's like, I want this to go to that. Maybe I don't know what that item's named, okay? Or where it is currently residing in my crazy item list. Drop actions are pretty fantastic. They make rigging a little bit easier. Okay, so now things are starting to look and behave the way I want them to work, right? I got my topmost chain. I can move that around and get that going where I want it to go. I can grab the second one and, oops, there we go. Rotate it. Its bottom one, its child rotates. There we go. So now we can start going in and crafting a pretty complex animation with very simple relationships. However, we haven't created a rig that's really animator friendly because we're forcing our animators to go in and know which mesh items to select and then to select them. That's dangerous. What would be better is if we were to go in and create a whole series of control points for our rig that will allow our animator to very quickly select and rotate the things that we want them to rotate inside the scene. Let me undo for a second. All right. To do this, to create control locators or control points for our rig, we're going to create what are called locators. Locators are a rigging tool. They're used all over the place. A locator is just really a non-renderable item, so you'll never see a locator in the final render, but it serves as a great connection point between different items. A locator has a series of transform channels associated with it, so we can move a locator. We can rotate it. We could technically scale it, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. There are better ways of transferring scale data between different items in the item list. They look like this. This is another thing that our industry has standardized on. A locator is always going to be this really cool kind of star-crossed pattern. When I click on the locator button, where is it created? At the origin. Okay, locators are always, always, always created at the origin of of our scene. So remember that. Okay, if you're confused as to where they are, look at the origin. Okay. Now, what's cool about the locators is that since they're an item, they can be a participant of our little rig. And here's what I'm going to do. Good rigging practice is to create a master locator, a master control. Okay. This is often referred to as the root locator. It is the master, it is the king of the castle, right? Everything is parented and is influenced by this one thing, okay? We don't want our animators or anyone else really to go in and physically start to touch mesh items. That gets dangerous pretty quickly. So I always want my animators to be touching and influencing a locator because it's just a dot in space, okay? Let's give it a good name. I'm going to call that one root. Okay, get used to seeing this. This is like the root of a tree, that tap root that goes all the way down into the ground. All the trunks and the tree branches are attached to the root, right? All right. So I'm going to put my root locator, I'm just going to move it up some so that it's above the first chain link. Okay. Now these little crosses, since they're going to be ultimately things that I want my animators to click and select on, right now they're kind of difficult to select, right? They're really thin. If you're way magnified out in your scene, they're going to be kind of difficult to see. Let's change the way the computer's going to draw all of these control locators, or just locators as a whole. And this is another reason to rig in Modo, okay? I love this. You can do this in other apps, but they make you jump through a lot of hoops. So I have my locator selected, as you can see inside of my scene. And if I cruise over to my properties panel, we have a section here called shape. And notice that the shape value is set to default. However, if I change this from default to custom, I get a whole series of options, and this is pretty neat, okay? Because now I can change how my little locator is going to be drawn inside of my 3D view. Its function is still the same. We're just changing the way it's being displayed, okay? And this is pretty handy because now we can create something that's maybe a different size, something that's a little bit more noticeable and clickable inside the scene. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to change mine to a circle. Okay, so right now it's a little disc. I'm also going to say I want this aligned to the y-axis. Okay. I also don't want it to be a solid, and boy, it needs to be a little bit bigger. So if I go down into its local channels, please note that on the circle we have a radius, which will change its size, and I want to make this pretty big. Aha, and now I have a really big noticeable white ring that I can click on, and then of course naturally continue to move around the scene. So that's kind of cool. All right, let's start making some meaningful connections between these locators and the rest of our rig. How do I parent my root, or this entire hierarchy, to my root locator? That works. That's a great way of working. I can just grab this one right here, left click and drag it on top of the root control locator, and then now they're a parent, or now that parent-child relationship has been created. Okay? I can move my control locator, and the rest of the hierarchy goes along for the ride. Yeah. Samantha.
Should you parent and child everything before you add it?
Yeah, you can. That'd be good. You can do it at any time, really. I created the parent-child relationships and all my links first before I put it back onto its locator. Okay. So this is starting to work. I like it. However, I think I want a whole series of control locators for each link. Okay? That way, instead of grabbing the actual mesh object, they can select a locator, and then it will influence just that one object. Okay? So let's create a new locator. Hit the button. And before we go any further, let's give it a good name. Okay? Part of being a rigger is kind of having a granular kind of sense of information. Name things as you go. That way you're not confused as to their purpose and role in the larger context of the rig. So I'm going to call this link 01 control. Okay? Now look very carefully how I'm choosing my naming convention here for this one locator. I'm making it very plainly easy to see by any person on the face of the planet that this locator is a control locator. It's going to control something in the rig. This is not an alignment locator, or it's not part of some other mechanical system. This is something that I want you to touch, that I want you to work with. Okay? All right. All right, so this is going to control just the first link, okay? So now we have a little bit of a challenge in here, in that we have to, or let's do this. Before we go any further, let's change its display properties, just so it can be a little bit easier to see. Once again, I'm going to change it to a circle. This one I'm going to leave solid, but I'm going to align it to the x-axis so that it's kind of that little disc there. And this is kind of cool, and this is why these shape properties are so neat, is that I'm going to leave the locator where it is. Now I'm going to zoom in so you can really see it on my screen, and you'll see this on yours too, but check this out, okay? You can see the pivot point of that locator, right? I'm going to turn off my grid. You can see the pivot point of that locator. It's right there, okay? Watch what happens when I start changing the offset values of our shape properties, okay? The pivot point's going to remain in that exact same location, but now that circle is going to be offset from that location, which will allow us to pull away the shape without changing where this locator is rotating around, okay? That's pretty cool. Here they are, offset. This is what I'm talking about. And I need to offset it along the z-axis. Oop, going the wrong way. See how that pivot point stayed in its location? And now that circle is offset from the rig, okay? And I've made it very easy for my animator to go in and click on it, okay? Creating a button. Buttons, buttons, who's got the buttons, okay? Now we're going to need a couple of these. So I tell you what, here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to duplicate my 3 little link controllers, okay? 1 or 2, 3. Let's be good stewards of our scene here. Name as we go. Because if you don't, you will get confused. There we go. All right. So we've named them. Since I've duplicated them after I've made all these changes, those changes to the shape properties have been retained, which is pretty cool. I'm all about doing the hard stuff one time and then duplicating it over and over and over again. But now what I need to do is that I need to get each one of these control locators in the exact same position of the center point of its item, of its link, okay? Now the first one's already done for us. But link number 2 and number 3, we need to move them down, okay? I want the link 02 control locator to be right there at that dot, at the center point of the item it's going to control, okay? Check it out. It's really easy to do this if we use our drop actions, okay? Drop actions are the bee's knees, man. They are awesome. Because one of the things that we have is we have match position, okay? This is going to allow us to take one item and match that item's position to the thing we drop it on top of. It's cool. It's very cool. Check this out. So if you do match, it's going to match all of the transform channels, position, rotate, and scale, or we can get pretty specific. I'm just going to match position. Okay, here we go. I'm going to grab, this happens, I'm going to turn off, if you think about it, all 3 of these locators are sharing the exact same space in our 3D scene. So I'm going to turn off 1 and 3 just to make sure I don't accidentally click on the one I don't want to work with. So there's 2, drag and drop, it goes where it needs to go, okay? Do the same thing for number 3, drag and drop, we've matched the position of the item we dropped it onto. And now I very quickly have aligned all of those 3 locators to their corresponding link, okay? The drop actions make life so much easier because we can use the fluidity of the interactive environment of our OpenGL viewport to aid in the rigging process. It's no longer just a window. It's an active participant in our tool workflow. However, what haven't we done here? Yeah.
You parented them with their respective chains.
Haven't parented them yet, yeah, right? We've just moved them around. We've just said, hey, look at this item's transform information and make mine the same. There's not a relationship there. It's a really fancy copy and paste. That's all it is. Yeah. So to move it, that's all we did. We just moved it, right? We want to move the locator. Yeah. We want to move the locator down so that its location is at the exact same position as the chain link it's going to control. Okay? So here's the center point for the locator. If you look carefully, the center point for the chain link is also right there. Okay? Locator, right there. Link, right there. Locator, link. They're all in the same spot, which is what we're after. Okay? All right. So now, how do we get these links, these control locators to be parented to their appropriate link? Yeah, let's give it a try. There's a couple ways that we can do this, right? So we certainly could go in and do it all on the item list. It kind of gets a little sloppy from time to time, but it works. So this one, I'm going to drag onto the root, okay? And then all of this gets parented to link 1, okay? Because now the root controls link 1 control, which then controls link 1, okay? So you could do that. There's a lot of reshuffling in the item list, and it can get confusing pretty quickly, okay? Here's an alternative. If you've already explored the options in your drop actions, check it out. We have some really great ones in here. We have insert. This is going to allow us to take any item and insert it into an existing hierarchy, okay? There's really two that we need to, well, there's only two options, but let's compare and contrast the differences between insert at parent and insert at place, okay? This is going to place our control locators in their respective hierarchy over here. So I want to do it on link number 2, okay? So my drop action, let's do insert at parent, and I want to insert this one. If I just drag it on top of that chain link, what happens? Does it do what we wanted it to do? It did, actually. Okay? It inserted this control locator above the item that I put it on inside of our hierarchy. However, where is it? It's not gone forever. It actually went and it changed its transform information to the parent, to its parent, okay? To the locator's parent, which is this chain link. So it moved all of its transform, it's using the transformation information of this one, and it's overwriting the transform channels of this, which is not what we want. So I'm going to hit undo, okay? What we want is insert in place. Same thing, left click and drag it on top of the chain link, boom. It stays where it's supposed to stay inside the OpenGL viewport, okay? And it's also inserting it inside the hierarchy in the correct way, okay? It's underneath. It's now a child of chain, of the first link, okay? Let's do it one more time. Insert in place is what we want, because we want to leave this locator visibly in the same place, but we want to insert it in the hierarchy. Drag and drop. And if you look at what happened over here, this is what we get. So big picture idea behind this is we have a master controller that's going to influence every single thing. And then we have control points within inside the rig that control very specific mesh items. Okay? Let's test it. Because a good practice to get into when you're rigging is to make something and then test it. Okay, that works. I like that. If I grab that one, yep. If I grab that one, yep. Oh, the rotation, the pivot point's off, but I can fix that. Yep. Okay, so I know from my test that my pivot points, I'm going to return this, my pivot points are wrong, but luckily we can change that just by selecting the pivot point and just moving it up. That way everything is going to be rotating where we want it to rotate. Okay, let's see if that works now. I've made a change, so the moment I'm done making the change, there she blows. There it is. And now they're all rotating where I want them to rotate. Yeah?
So really knowing what we know now, we maybe wouldn't have changed the rotation on the mesh themselves. We would have, sorry, the pivot on the mesh itself. Maybe we only changed the pivots on the locators.
Absolutely. And Jason is absolutely right. Knowing what we know now, we didn't have to change the pivot points on the mesh because the locator is going to be what's changing the mesh's rotation inside of 3D space. Yeah. Great question. All right. Other questions on this? Yeah.
So now we should move all the pivot points from all the locators.
Yep. Test it. Just if you're running into a problem, just look at what the problem is and change the pivot point to resolve the problem.
So like click on the locator and then I try to do a pivot, it's just pivoting the locator.
Okay.
So I grab this and it's just moving this.
Okay. Do me a favor. Select that link's. Oh, yeah. Okay. So chain is not actually parented to link 01 control. It's actually parented to root.
Okay. So it should be here.
Oh, grab. Yep. Now lift, click, and drag that on top of link 01. There it is.
Okay.
Cool. Now try it now. Try it. Ah, cool.
Okay.
So Elliot just ran into something that I think is a good learning moment for all of us. Okay. Really examine if something's not working. Examine how your hierarchy has been created. Okay. Collapse it. Okay. And really look at it in kind of an individual kind of basis. Oops. Okay. So I got my root. It has one child. So when I move the root, this is really the only thing that it's going to move is link 01 control, which happens to have its own child of chain link 1, whose child is link 2 control, so on and so forth. Okay? Expanding and collapsing your hierarchies and seeing how this little stair step thing works is a great way to help troubleshoot your problem if one has popped up. One final thing, then I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes to kind of continue building your rig and making it something that's usable and workable. Super user keyboard shortcut that I wish honestly someone would have shown me when I was first learning the rigging tools. Okay, because rigging is all about relationships and hierarchies. Okay, really big long list of items with a lot of interconnected pieces. If you want to see your entire hierarchy, to expand your entire hierarchy or collapse an entire hierarchy or portions of it thereof. See how mine's completely collapsed? Okay. If I want to work with the very last item in my hierarchy, I would have to do this to find the actual item. I'm not doing that. You think about it. You're going to have 10 links in your chain, each with their own control locator. That's 20 different items. And in a global, it's 21 different things. If you want to get to the bottom one, that could be a pain in the butt, right? So here's the power user trick. Hold down the Shift key and click on the disclosure arrow. It expands the entire hierarchy. It also does the collapse of the exact same thing. So I can collapse the entire hierarchy by just shift clicking on the disclosure arrow. That's a good trick. That'll save you a lot of click, 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 and a whole bunch of arrows to get down where you want to go. Yes, sir. It's a locator, right? Locator. Yeah, so take your application and grab the frame and move it to the left or right so we can see our toolbar. That's a locator. That's a locator. Yep, it's going to be created at the origin of your scene and then parent your entire chain link hierarchy to it. All right, one final thing, and I'll give you guys some time to build your rigs, okay? I mentioned earlier we don't really want our animators, or anyone for that matter, to be messing with my geometry, okay? I don't want them meshing with the geo if I can afford it, okay? So luckily for us, the Modo rigging system is pretty powerful, and we can go in and deactivate a user's ability to select an item, which is pretty cool, okay? It forces them to only select that item in the item list, because I don't want my animator to be, oops, and messing with my geometry. I only want them to click on these things. So check this out. If I select on a piece of geometry and return to the Properties panel, this assembly section way down here, this is cool, right? The assembly, check it out. Under the selection category up here at the top, I can turn the selection ability to no. Now, I can't click on it in the OpenGL viewport. I can still select it in the item list, but at the very least, we've made it just a little bit more difficult for them to accidentally go in and screw up our stuff. So I can still select it over here and get back to its properties in the item list if I wanted to. Now, if you really wanted people to not touch your stuff, you could also lock it. However, I'm starting to think that if you were to lock it, yeah, you can still animate it. You just really can't touch it and mess it up. I don't really lock things all that often. I just turn off a user's ability to select it, and that's really ultimately all you really need under the assembly section. It's pretty cool. All right. Questions? Yeah.
For a locator, I can't maybe just only have the locator. I just move the position and rotate only.
Yeah, so locator is only going to move, rotate, and scale.
No, you can just deactivate the other.
You can. Yeah, you can turn off channels if you want, but we're not going to get into that today. Yeah, you can just kind of mute them and refuse any sort of transform information to be passed into that area. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yep. So I'll expand my hierarchy and zoom in while you guys work. That way you can kind of get a good sense of how this is going to be built. I've done the first couple for you. If you look at the details of your assignment or your lab work, you're going to be doing 10 of these. Okay? All right, so I still have a couple more things that I want to talk about today, but I tell you what, I'm going to give you guys maybe 20, 30 minutes or so to see if we can get this rig on its way to completion. Now, if you have your rig done, like enterprising people, start animating, okay? Start animating. Try to get your lab work done, okay? Because there is an animation component of your lab assignment. You're going to have to make it swing, okay? And we'll talk about that in detail here in a minute. Yes, sir? Okay, let me change something on the live stream. Okay, so some of you guys are dangerously close to being done with your lab assignment. That's awesome. Keep working at it. Okay, let's just look at Canvas real fast and kind of wrap out our modules. We'll just kind of finish our conversation about the chain so we can start talking about the catapult a little bit. Okay, so everyone hopefully has a chain with 10 links on it. Okay, control rig for chains. Okay, put some material and textures on the chain, and then you're going to need to animate the chain. Okay, swing from a stationary point like a pendulum. Okay, so have it swing and then stop. Your animation needs to be about 10 seconds. Okay, and please make sure you're rendering at 1280 by 720. We'll talk about rendering here in a second. If you haven't rendered animations before, it's pretty easy. I've given you guys a simple little example of what we're after. It's just this is not going to be a portfolio quality animation, okay? This is a mechanical animation that just kind of gets us through the process of rigging, rendering, and then submitting, okay? However, the catapult one gives you a really great opportunity to do something fun. So as I mentioned at the beginning of class today, your assignment is to take the catapult, the supplied catapult file, and to create a simple little scene and then rig your catapult so that it could maybe throw and launch some sort of projectile out there in the universe, okay? There's a couple things in here from the rigging perspective that we need to establish to make our rig work, okay? Specifically, what's the big thing on our rig that we need to make? The movement of the arm, okay, and the wheels, okay? Because as the catapult enters frame, or as the catapult moves around, the wheels should be moving as well. From our earlier conversation about rigging, and if you've taken a chance to look at the model file, what's the thing that we have to change in order to get the wheels to rotate? Let's look at what the model file gives us. Here it is, okay? If I go into item mode and start exploring, these are all the polygons that are on one item. The arm or the catapult's on the other. So what do we need to do to get the wheels to rotate independently? You got to put the wheels on their own item, because if we want something to move, it's got to be on its own dedicated item, okay? And then we have to create some sort of relationship between the wheels and the base of the catapult to get what we're after. Okay. Now I'm going to do one real fast for you, and you guys can take this and run with it and do the rest. It's relatively easy. Let's start, however, with a new mesh item. Okay. New mesh. Let's be good stewards. We'll call this wheel 01. Okay. And now I can go in, and in component mode, here I'm going to see if I can very carefully, I'm going to hide some pieces, H, that way I have an unobstructed marquee selection here. That was easy. And believe it or not, I'm going to edit cut, and then go to my new mesh item, edit paste. Okay. I'm going to go back to my catapult and unhide that other geometry before I forget about it, and I can start the preparation of my rig on the wheel. From our earlier conversation, and just let's do this. Let's turn off the visibility of the other two items and look at our wheel. What's the next step in this? Based off of an earlier conversation we had about our rigging kind of system. Moving the pivot point. Where's the pivot points? What's the default location for the pivot point? The origin, right? Do I want the wheel rotating around the origin? No. Where do I want the wheel rotating around? Right in the center of the wheel. Now, you can do this visually, which is not a bad way of working. You can do it like visually. I'm going to do it mathematically because I like precision. I'm an OCD control freak. I mean, here's today's super user nugget of the day. Okay, this is a pretty cool trick, and it is a fantastic time saver. I'm going to use the work plane to automatically center the pivot point for this item in the center of the wheel. Okay, check this action out. It's pretty neat. It's pretty easy to do it too, which makes it even all the better. I'm going to go into my edge selection state. Okay, And I'm going to double click on the edge that represents the center line of that wheel, because in every sense, that's where I want my pivot point to be, in the center of the wheel. Now, because I've selected an edge loop, the computer is kind of understanding the volume in 3D space that I have selected. And when I change my work plane, I'm going to align my work plane to the selection. It's going to look at that edge loop, and it's going to put the center of my work plane in the center of the selection, which just happens to be in the center of the wheel, right? There we go. Now here's something that I like to do just to visualize where the center of my work plane is. This is another great modifier inside of our engine. And I tell the computer to draw the center of my work plane under Draw Axis. Aha! Okay, so that new XYZ indicator at the center is the center of my work plane. Now what I'm going to ask the computer to do is I'm going to grab my pivot point, this item over here, and under the Setup tool tab, towards the bottom, we have a very cool command, Align to Work Plane. Okay? That's going to take the selected component, whether it be a polygon, an edge, a vert. In this case, we're using the pivot point, and it's going to automatically align it to the center of the work plane. Okay? I'm in the Setup tool tab, kind of towards the bottom. Align to work plane. Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. I mix this up all the time. It's not aligned to work plane. That's my problem. I apologize. It's to work plane position. This is for entire items. This is for component pieces. I always do that once. I mess up on that one time every single time. Okay? And now, if you look very, very carefully, the pivot point for that item has been moved right where I want it to be moved. Okay? Turn off. I'm going to reset my work plane. If you don't reset your work plane, the rest of your app is going to act oddly, because almost everything is referencing the current orientation and location of the work plane. So we want to reset it to align itself back to the global XYZ axes. There we go. And I don't want it to draw axes anymore. Let's test it, because we just made a major change to that item. If I just hit the Y key, the Atom Transform tool, yeah, now we're talking. Okay? Now, if this really bugs you, and I can understand why it would bug you, okay? Because the pivot point's where it needs to be, but the center point's way out over here at the origin. That kind of bugs people, because what is the purpose of the center point? It's center of the mesh. It's supposed to be kind of a rough approximation of where the center of this mesh is, okay? So here's a great little trick to get that center point roughly to where the center of this mesh is. I'm going to select my center point. Okay, so I went into my center selection set. And now, under the Edit pull-down menu, there is a fantastic one. And it's Center to Bounding Box, and we'll choose Center. Okay? The bounding box is a real rough volume of your polygons. Okay? So it's just looking at the geometry on that item. And it will move the center point to the center of that volume. Boop. Of course, it also moved the work plane in tandem, so I should have done that first. So we'll do the work plane tricky. We'll align the pivot point back to where I wanted it to. Let's do this one more time. I apologize. I got out of sequence.
Wait, you could have very easily just aligned the center point into the middle of the wheel, right? Or would that not have been accurate?
That would have worked too. Yeah. That would have given you almost the exact same result. There we go. All right, so now with that fixed, yeah, there we go. That's what I'm after. Aha, awesome. Let's turn on the rest of my cat. I would literally do that for every single wheel before I go any further. Okay? You could if you wanted to. All right. So now we're creating a little bit more of a complex network here. Of course, let's start talking about how we can rig our catapult. What's the first thing that we probably should start throwing together for our little rig here? What are we going to do with the wheel, Mookie?
Move them around.
So It works. It rotates where it's supposed to rotate locally. What do I need to do to the wheel as far as a hierarchy and a relationship with the other items in the scene? I like it. Make a root locator, a master controller. Absolutely, right? Because I want to be able, in the big picture of this, I want to be able to grab one thing and move the entire catapult around, right? So that'd be all 4 wheels, the arm, the base of the catapult. There's 6 mesh items that all need to move together as a unit. So I think creating a master control locator is a great, great, great place to begin. Let's do that real fast. I'm going to go over to my setup tools, create a locator. We create something, so let's change its name before we go any further. I'm also going to change its display properties because I really like these shape draw options. I want to make it a big circle, pointing up, and then I'll increase the radius so that it pretty much extends outside. Yeah, that's good. Cool. That's pretty groovy. Now that I have a master controller, I can start creating my rig. So I know that I need to have the catapult, the arm, and the wheels. Oops, didn't mean to do that. There we go. All parented to the root. Right? So that way, when I grab that, fire off the move command, everything comes along for the ride. I can still rotate the wheels independently. I can also go in and fire off a rock. Okay, the catapult arm, that's pretty cool. But it's the end of the day. Let's kick it up a notch. Okay? I'm talking about relationships all day long. Let's have a little fun because we can do better. Okay? I'm not going to hand animate the wheel, right? Yeah. We're better than that, right? I want to be able to drag that one locator, and however far I drag the locator, I want the wheels to automatically turn and rotate their appropriate distance. Okay? I'm not gonna hand animate each individual wheel. Come on now. We're better than that. We can do better than that. Let's do it. It's a whole lot of fun. It's pretty simple, but it requires us to go into our schematic viewport. Okay? First exposure to schematic. It's going to be pretty fun. So I always try to prototype the rig in my brain before I start actually creating it. I want to move the root control and have it influence the wheel, the rotation of one of my wheels, okay? That's the big picture idea. Move the ring, the wheel automatically rotates the distance the ring travels, okay? The schematic is a pretty cool interactive workplace that allows us to take items in our item list and then drag them down into our schematic environment. So I'm going to start off by left-clicking on my root controller, this locator, and I'm going to left-click and drag it down into my schematic. And it shows up as a node. Okay? These nodes are pretty cool because now we can physically see the wires that will transfer data between different items inside of our scene. In addition, we have our root controller in there. Let's get wheel 1 in there too. All right. So I want to send data from this object over into my wheel. That's the idea. I want to be able to move my controller and influence the wheel. Now we need to get granular. What data are we going to send? Specifically, which channels are going to influence each other? For the root controller, we want to take its master global location and have it influence the rotation of our wheel. The only part that's really hidden about this section, and admittedly, is getting access to the global understanding of its location. We have to go into the channel list. Okay? So I have my root controller selected. The channel list is going to show us all the input and output channels for this item inside of the Modo animation engine. And there are a bunch of them in here. We're not going to go into all of them, but there is. If you scroll down this list here, you will see right there, world position. That's the one we're after. I'll left click and drag this into my schematic, and it will show up underneath my controller. And now, if you look very carefully, I have an output node that I can start making connections to. Okay? I'm just going to send its world position information to the wheel. Now, what do I want to have on the wheel? What do I want to influence? Rotation. So let's do the exact same thing. I'm going to find my wheel. Okay? Now, you could do this inside the channel list, but you can also do it in the Properties tab, by the way, which is probably the easiest way for us to get to where we're ending up. Okay? Now, which rotation? Looks like it's going to be X rotation, so that's the one I'm after. If I right-click on the channel, I'll get a crazy contextual menu. But one of the options in this long list is Add Channel to Schematic. Okay? Bloop. Okay? There we go. And I think I may have had more than one. I did. I had a whole bunch selected on accident. Rotation X. There we go. That's what we're after. Okay, so this is the big picture idea. I want to take the world position and feed it into the rotation. But what's happening visually here? It's going red. I like the way that the Foundry does this. This is great. I wish all schematic editors gave you this instant feedback that this connection type doesn't work. Because if you think about it, we are transferring data. We're transferring position data into a channel that will only accept rotation data, right? What unit of measurement do we use for position? Meters, feet, right? What's the unit of measurement for rotation? Degrees, right? So those two units don't match. There has to be some sort of translator in the center that will take feet in and then pop out degrees, rotation degrees. This translator is called a modifier. We're going to talk a lot about modifiers. This is a really, really easy one. Okay? Check it out. If we go into this pull-down menu right here, we can add a number of different things. You can basically add almost any item in this pull-down menu, but where we're going is channel modifiers, other, and what we're after, and I apologize, getting cut off. What we're after is one called the revolve modifier. Okay? So we're adding a channel modifier. It's under the other category. And I have no idea why it's other. Okay? And then revolve. That's what we're after. Okay? These modifiers are basically like translators. They're going to turn inputs into different values at output. There it is. And check it out. If you look closely here, you can begin to see the translator doing exactly what it wants to do. It has an input value. I can input position, and then I can output an angle, which is what I'm after. Okay? So world position on my controller. Aha, it goes green. Yay! Okay, so it accepts that data type. Then angle output, it's going to go to the rotation of the wheel. So it's taking in and in, doing a whole bunch of crazy math on the inside of this little node, and it's spitting out angles. Okay? Now, if I return to my catapult and select my wheel, or excuse me, select my controller, yeah, cool, huh? Yeah, do you think animators are actually like rotating and animating the movement of wheels? No, they're not. Okay, I went and saw Cars 3 over the summer. Did you guys see Cars 3? It's actually a pretty decent film, in all honesty. It's very similar to like Finding Dory. It lives on its own, but it's very familiar to maybe the original in structure. Okay, about halfway through, you can kind of see where the film is going. It's entertaining nonetheless. It's actually pretty good. It is light years, and I mean light years better than Cars 2. It's still a whole lot of fun. Yeah, on a film that's entirely comprised of cars as characters, you know, the Pixar animators weren't animating each wheel individually. They had rigs that were doing the heavy lifting for us. Okay, their rigs, I've actually seen their rigs. Their rigs are pretty special. their rigs actually will understand the topology of the ground, and the chassis will actually move on the ground. And I mean, it's basically like they're just dragging a locator, and their car is going anywhere the locator goes, up and down the hills. The rigs are cool too, because the wheels will actually turn based off of the angle that the locator is rotating around. It's pretty fancy. It's very fancy, actually. It's pretty rad. This is kind of the underpinning of this entire idea. Okay? Pretty cool. So I did the exact same thing for each of the other 3 wheels. So I just drag one rotator, I drag one locator, and all of the wheels rotate the way they're supposed to rotate. It's pretty cool. Well, every week we're going to take another baby step into the world of schematics. This is our first one. Adrian. Yeah, you can get pretty high tech if you'd like. Yeah, if you really like. And this is, I don't have the other 3 wheels separated on their own items, but you could have this same angle output. I can drag it from here to another wheel, from there to another wheel, so they're all getting the same distance information, or excuse me, the same angle information from the modifier in the center. It's pretty neat. It's very neat, actually. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's going to make rigging your catapult a whole lot of fun. We're going to be playing with this catapult again next week, so please make sure you bring this catapult with you back to class, because next week we're going to talk about set-driven keys, which will help us prevent our catapult from launching something further than its support structures should allow it. Question? You set it up wrong somehow. Okay, let's do this. So it is 4:10. We've got about 20 minutes left in class. Are there any questions on what the expectations for our homework in our lab are this week? Everyone's zeroed in, dialed, kind of getting it for the most part? Okay. As I mentioned at the beginning of class, of course, naturally, make sure you go in and check out the live stream if you have some questions on the stuff that we've talked about. However, 100% of what I've talked about today is in here. Okay. If you're new to rendering in Modo, okay, rendering animations in Modo, okay, definitely make sure you look at these 2, okay. It's really easy to render animations from Modo, but we're going to pop out an image sequence, and then we'll have to compile that image sequence back over in After Effects. It's wicked easy. It's super simple. I know all of you guys can do it. Instead of spending a lot of invaluable class time on it, I'll just let you guys look at that reference document. They're not long. They're like 3 or 4 minutes apiece, so you can check it out. Questions? Everyone's good? Understanding it? All right. If I don't see you before we escape at 4:30, have a wonderful 3-day weekend, and I'll see you guys next week, okay?